All right, whoever you are that just hit play, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this is your first time here, welcome to you. Everyone else, what's up? How are you doing? Can you feel it? Can you feel patterns from your past coming round again? Am I the only one who's experiencing that? Even right now in this moment, I'm coming to you from the attic late on a Friday night. If you've been listening to the show for long enough, you might remember for many years that was my ritual, was to record the intros and outros late on a Friday night. At some point, I started to think better of that because that late at night, I would get really loopy sometimes, and the intros and outros got real rambling, and I think I was sometimes talking about stuff that maybe was best not to be talked about in an intro or outro always, but not that I regret it, and you could go back and listen to them. They're all still there. But I would say that at some point I felt like I wanted to bring a different energy to the intros and outros, not late night on a Friday night when I'm totally scrazzed out. So I started doing them on Sunday mornings. And, you know, I've been doing them from the backyard. So I don't know if you listen that close, you can hear like birds and stuff in the background these days. But not this week. This week is like old times. It is late on a Friday night and I am in the attic. And the reason for that is we have this planned family weekend. We're going to visit these old friends that we haven't seen in like, I don't know, 8-9 years. They all got kids and they've all grown up. And so it's going to be a big to-do to go hang out with our old friends and see folks we haven't seen in a long time. So I'm going to be away and I'm not going to have an opportunity to do stuff. So we're making it happen. There's a lot that's been going on this week too. As many of you know, I decided to open a yoga center, which is something I wouldn't have thought I was going to do again. That's coming around again. Although it's definitely different. Everything's different this time, even though the pattern comes back around. Like I've been through this similar pattern before, but I'm different now, you know? So in any case, very exciting news. I signed the lease and I got the keys. I got the keys to the new yoga center. And not only that, there was a kind of hurdle that happened, a potential big snag that ended up getting taken care of because my new landlord is awesome. I actually shouldn't jinx it. Let me I don't want to jinx it, but the landlord has really been coming to bat. You see, I showed up at the space to get the lease and we had talked about him doing some renovations to the space, namely redoing the floors, specifically the floor in the practice space, more than any of the other floors even, although he threw that in. But when I got there to get the lease, he hadn't done like a whole section in the front part of like the practice space. And I was like, wait, didn't we talk about redoing all of this? And you know, if you're yoga teachers, you know the floor of the practice space. It's like the bones of the place. It's kind of essential. And I was like concerned as how's this going to go? And as soon as I said it, he remembered. Like he could see in his face. He remembered that we had talked about that and he had forgot. However, his guy who does all the work was about to go out of town for like a long time. And there was kind of a look in his face where there was a possibility where this could really mean a considerable delay, like even a couple of weeks, which would really have thrown me off. Like a couple of weeks delay, I'm ready to get in there and get rolling, get stuff together and get going. And if the floor is not done, I can't do it. So I was like, oh no, is this going to be a big long delay? So I waited a day. He was supposed to call me and he didn't call me. And I was like, oh no. And then on yesterday, I was composing a text to him in which I was letting him know that, if there needs to be delay, I understand. And just let me know how long he thinks it's going to be. It's like, I'm being a good tenant. I want to get along. I want to have a good relationship with the landlord. But while I was doing that, while I was composing the text, he called me from Home Depot. He was picking out the flooring and he wanted to let me have my choice of what I wanted. So I got to pick the flooring I wanted. And then he got in there and him and the guy did it in like a day and a half. It's done. So yesterday I got the keys, went in there. It's looking great. I got a new yoga center. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot to do. And like I was talking about last week, like a lot of little decisions that got to get made. But boy, did that feel amazing. It feels amazing, to have this new possibility on the table. Just like in 2007 when I opened my other place. Although everything's different, as I was saying, I'm not going to do any of it the same. I'm not nervous in the same way. I have a much clearer idea about what I'm doing, and I'm not doing the same thing I was doing back then. Like what I'm doing now is totally specific to 2024. And that's the other thing. You see, the thing that's really made me feel the best about my new landlord and the new space is the other day when I got the keys and checked out the space, I had this whole conversation with the landlord, and he was talking about how he grew up in this neighborhood and how when he was a kid, there was all of these independent local businesses. There was an ice cream shop and there was a mom and pop market. And he said, you didn't have to leave College Hill. You could just do everything on the hill. We had this like cool little strip on Cattell Street. And he's like, I really want to try to bring that back. And I'm really glad you're here. And he was just like saying all the stuff that you would want your landlord to say. And he's really wants to support me. So all of that is kind of awesome and encouraging and great. Then at the same time, there was like all of these other decisions that I had to make that had to just do with other stuff in my life and my business. And I had to set some boundaries, and it was difficult, but I did that because you have to get your life situation in order. You got to get your house in order to support whatever it is that you're looking to do. That's what we were talking about last week. If you were here with Susie Amendola, we were talking about lifestyle medicine, right? And the changes that you make in your life to support you in pursuing whatever it is you feel you're supposed to pursue, or however you like to think about you finding your way, which is very much what my talk today is about with Katie Armstrong. I met Katie 6 weeks ago or so at the Berkshire Yoga Festival. We bumped into each other at the VIP event, which is funny. Basically what they did is they planned this party for all of the presenters, and then people who registered for the festival could pay to come to the party too and hang out with all the presenters, which on paper can kind of sound weird, but in actuality was really fun and great. And I had a wonderful time at that VIP event. And I bumped into Katie, and we immediately got into a conversation about nervous systems and hormone replacement therapy for women and menopause, which I had just been talking about with Judith and Lizzie Lassiter on the show, and my wife. If you've been listening, I was talking about that not too long ago. So we immediately jumped into a pretty cool conversation. And I said, hey, listen, why don't you come on the podcast and we'll talk more? And so we did. And Katie has a real interesting take on some stuff, specifically about building muscle and building strength. I think she was using these phrases, strong is the new skinny and muscle as medicine. And that's not really where I've been at these days, but I was really intrigued to talk with her, and I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you're enjoying the show and you want to connect with me in other ways, there's certainly opportunities for us to do that. I've got on-demand videos that you could check out. I've got ongoing live classes and a discussion group that you might be interested in. I've got an upcoming teacher training group start happening pretty soon. And let me not forget that you might want to get access to the full-length archives of this show and become a supporter with a podcast premium subscription. Whatever it is that you might be interested as it pertains to me and what I'm doing, you can find it at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I will touch base with you on the other side for a moment, but let's go ahead and get into it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Katie Armstrong. Hi, Katie.
How are you doing? Is my sound okay for you today?
Yeah, you sound just fine. Can you hear me all right?
It's perfect.
All right. Hi, good to speak with you again in a not so loud room.
I know I enjoyed that event, but it was definitely not the easiest for going deep with people just because of the frenetic nature of it.
That's the nature of festivals. We could get to that. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but I actually recorded an episode from the festival. So this will post after. It might be good for us to reflect on it. But just to mention, I don't know how familiar you are with the show. I'm already recording. And if it's okay, I want us to consider ourselves having just begun. Is that all right?
Sure. Great.
All right. Very, very cool. Well, I guess starting with how we met at the Berkshire Yoga Festival at the VIP event, right? Which was kind of like the little party they had for like presenters.
It was so pretty up there on top of the mountain.
It was. We took the lift up. It was a little colder than I thought. I wish I had another layer, but still it was fun and it was a good vibe. And we bumped into each other near the cheese table, if I recall.
We sure did.
And we got to talking, and it's funny because it was loud in there, so I don't have as much of a memory of what we talked about as I would normally have, I think. But I do remember us having some conversation around like dysregulated nervous systems. And it's funny because just now, like earlier today, I was in a minor fender bender. It was not my fault. Like some college kid kind of turned into me. And I was just like sitting here getting ready to come on the call with you. And I was noticing how challenging it was to like get my nervous system in check, you know, because it's funny how much I've come to think of it in those terms. And I know you think of it in those terms too.
I do. The nervous system and like hormones, I'm often commented on by friends and family that I seem to look through these lenses of body systems. But for me, I find that really grounding and useful because then I can recognize that my state of being, while part of my consciousness, is also like all these systems that are at play. And if I can manage those systems, I can change my experience. And I find that very empowering.
Yes. Well, we can talk about like how we manage our systems. But sure. I guess before we get into the nitty gritty of that kind of stuff, which I think we will definitely get to, I am kind of curious a little bit just about how you ended up at the festival. Like, how did you get the gig?
Sure. Well, I was coming in from Boulder, Colorado, and I think other than some of the top headliners, I was probably traveling as far, if not farther, than most people. And I had a relationship with the founder, Andrew.
Yep. That seemed to be the way most of us got the gig, right?
Sure. I mean, in the end, networks are important. And I think when people have sincere relationships with other people, they really understand the heart of who they are and what they'll be bringing to the event. And I had hired him as a business coach when I was looking to close my 13-year-old clothing company. I was looking for some support to do it in a really conscious way. And I think in the process of our coaching, he saw all the different pieces of my entrepreneurial adventures, but also sort of the life that supports that, and knew that I was moving back into a role of coach. And he even witnessed some of my personal challenges and then the growth that helped me move through those challenges that were associated with like my own hormonal changes through postpartum, and how that changed my coaching to focus mostly on women and even hormones. And that's something I would love to visit with at least a little bit, but how underserved women are in that category, and how there's some pretty dire social stigmas around conversations around menstruation, menopause, perimenopause, these times in a woman's life that affect all women. I mean, they're pretty crucial periods in our personal journey, and yet they're not talked about, and they're certainly not supported sufficiently. So when I kind of told him how I had really targeted my coaching practice to work with women in these different times of their lives, and pitched the idea of doing a talk on, I think he ended up calling it hormones, muscles, and mitochondria, why you should add strength training to your embodiment practice. And we did talk about men and women, not just women, but I think he saw that is something that the yoga community is kind of aging into in a way. And like even a lot of the headline teachers are starting to experience perimenopause and menopause, and it's changing the way they're practicing. And like, I know this from personally being friends with a lot of those teachers, that many of them are realizing that yoga doesn't function as a complete practice into longevity as a female in the modern world as well as it could. And it's often better supplemented through strength training. So that's kind of the...
Yeah, I hear you. And as I mentioned to you in our brief chat in the loud room, I had an episode some weeks back with Judith and Lizzie Lassiter about some of the stuff that you're pointing to. Although your bit on strength training and how that would supplement or be an important part of someone's like movement diet outside of just going to yoga classes, I think is an area that I'm interested to discuss too. But before we get into that, I also want to take note of kind of what you said, because one of the things this podcast is about is sort of the trajectory of how things have gone in like the yoga industry or kind of like the wellness world.
Okay.
And I have like a specific memory of sometime probably around 2010. I don't remember exactly, but I know 2010 was a date that was cited in your bio, where for one, there was like articles in the New York Times about people giving up jobs as like investment bankers or lawyers to become yoga teachers, and how it was like this growing industry. And there was also like a lot of us yoga teachers who were just getting older, where we were thinking about the idea of like maybe starting families and stuff, but you couldn't make enough money necessarily teaching to do that. So everybody was kind of like coming up with different like yoga related businesses, whether it was like, yoga prop companies, or I specifically remember having a conversation with someone because I couldn't find like a pair of yoga pants that I liked. And I was like, maybe I should start a yoga pants company for men, So it seems like
one of those people.
In 2010, you were one of those people, right? Tell me, what was your gig that you left, and then what was the company that you started?
So I'll give you a snapshot of that period of time. I was working at a high-powered law firm in Denver, and I was pretty new to the law. So I graduated law school in 2008, and I was a competitive triathlete. So I had an unusual law job in the first place because I didn't quite work the hours that a typical first or second year associate would work, so that I could continue to train, which was pretty incredible. I had at that point been practicing yoga for 10 years. So I was for my age, because I'm only 43 now, I was very young to be introduced to yoga, because one, it was still in its infancy in a way in the United States. But I had shattered 2 vertebrae in college in a big snowboarding injury. And I had a professional soccer player who lived next door to me turn me on to Richard Freeman's studio, the yoga workshop. So I had a pretty incredible introduction to yoga, got very into it, realized that I was holding all of these patterns in my body from extensive cardio. Like I was a competitive triathlete and competitive swimmer and runner since I was like 5. I mean, I just had always been racing and training and building strength, and I was very tight. So not only was I working to heal this specific injury, but I was noticing how like a vulnerability in my knee was all about, the spiral of my leg being just a little bit off. And so I really dove in pretty deep to yoga and continued that practice as I went back into competitive sports. And so at the 10-year mark, I'm sitting there in the law firm, and it was also the recession. So it was this period of time where I was hired for a particular job, but not actually doing that job. A lot of my classmates were actually let go, or they weren't even, their original contracts were released. So they never even got to start being an attorney. So I was clinging on to this well-paying job, doing work that was not what I signed up for and that I ultimately didn't feel as good about. So I, as someone who really chased my personal passion and purpose, felt like I was risking falling out of alignment. And I started training with Shiva Ray around that time. So I was traveling out to LA, and I think I did like every single one of her teacher trainings. And
was that like a trance dance kind of period, or what was she doing around then?
She was heavy into trance dance, but she was also doing like chakra vinyasa and mandala asana. And so it was really, I was dating a gentleman who was a circus performer. He was on staff with Shiva. So I was kind of this almost staff person. I happened to have a really strong handstand practice. So I had an assistant that was big into handstands. So
it's so funny you say that. I had a good, strong handstand practice, and that got me like a lot of jobs. Frankly, totally. Around that time, if you could do a really good handstand, it meant something to some people. I don't know how much it really meant, but at that time, if you could be impressive with the physicalities, it would get you gigs.
I think that there's still a lot of value that people place in more advanced asanas, but some of that I think is valid if you're learning.
Sure. If the goal is to be able to do that, then sure.
Yeah, whether that translates to more centeredness or
strength, even. Like sometimes executing those poses doesn't mean you're stronger, but we could talk about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shiva is such an ecstatic person, and I very much resonated with her. She felt like a kindred spirit. So there was this intoxication to not just the practice of yoga, which is where I really found my truth, but I was thinking about becoming not just a casual teacher, but could I make this my full-time career? And just, I couldn't, as I was feeling more and more connected to self, and my job was feeling less and less connected to purpose, it just started to fracture. And I actually asked my company to do a review on me and ultimately asked to leave. And from there, I just went deep into soul searching. And similar to what you were saying, like the numbers just weren't lining up. Like I couldn't see how I could make a living being a yoga teacher. But I wanted to be as close to yoga as I could. And I ended up taking a trip to Bali that I thought was going to be like 2 or 3 weeks, and it ended up being 3 months, and stumbled on another Ashtanga practitioner who actually knew Richard and started training with them every day and started doing Mysore specifically, and was asked to like help somebody make their clothing line, and that relationship felt a little flawed. So it's all these pieces, right? All these little.
Like, did you have any experience working on clothing lines previously, or did you just like clothes or just?
I was an unusual student. I had 3 majors and 2 minors in undergrad, and one of them was art and one of them was art history. So I have a very creative side.
Sure.
Back in high school, voted the most creative in my class or whatever. But clothing, no. I mean, I loved fashion. I mean, Shiva, part of her tribe like vibe, has a certain element of flashiness. There was this like one designer that would come to all the events, and I would get stopped constantly for the outfits I put together, and people would joke around like, if you could get $1 for every comment you got on these outfits, like. So I felt like more of a stylist in my heart than a designer. But I was coming back to the first year of the Hanuman Yoga Festival as their creative director, volunteer position. And so I brought like a whole bunch of different artistic like renderings. Like, so there were, I don't know if you know much about Bali, but there's a huge art conclave there, and it crosses over with the spiritual community. So like on one hand, there's like a spiritual component to a lot of this statues and art that are being made by Westerners that are there. But then you also have a very rich cultural experience that's this combination of Hinduism and like Buddhism. So I brought back these gorgeous statues and then some more contemporary art, and they gave me a booth as like a gift. So I brought a whole bunch of other designers' fashion back, and I sold it very easily, like even before the event had started. So I like quickly imported a whole bunch more. And that was like the launch of my clothing company. And I went back and started actually designing my own stuff the next year. So it kind of had this momentum that I didn't even, none of it was planned. It would be a huge understatement to even say that. It had just this like tidal wave of momentum that carried me into the yoga space and gave me a chance to be very close to some of the best teachers in the world, all over the world. So that was pretty amazing.
Well, that is very interesting. That momentum that you're talking about, I often refer to that as one of the waves. Like there was a couple of waves of yoga, like going into the mainstream. And part of that, one of those waves were the emergence of these festivals. Like it used to be conferences and like, the basement of the Marriott hotel, and there's like no windows, and it felt like you were like at like a lecture in college or something, And then it became like these festivals that people were putting together, and there was yoga journal festivals, but then there was lots of independent festivals, and then there was Wanderlust. So that you kind of right at that moment found yourself in like a booth at one of the vendor villages, right at the Hanuman Yoga Festival and whatever it was, 2010 or something. Yep. I could exactly see it's like you're surfing and the waves behind you and you just caught it, easy.
It was a wild time. I mean, and I know exactly what you're referring to because I had been to some of the early yoga journal conferences just as an attendee, and I have a very balanced masculine, feminine, but I probably lean towards the masculine. So that really fed my let's learn this, let's do this mentality. And then I happened to be, again, practicing with Shiva during those first years of Wanderlust Festival. And even before I had started my company, I was invited to go as vibe keepers. Like, so it was a bunch of performance artists and dancers. And we were essentially like set up in this mansion to party kind of, but like in a yogic sort of way, and wear wild outfits and just bring the vibe. So like I got to feel and see that. And then all of a sudden I was in the midst of the commerce associated with it. And for the next 10 years got to use the momentum, but also see a change in yoga and its priority and
the internet, I imagine.
Like, gosh, yeah. I mean, Facebook existed by then, but Instagram, I mean, I remember my assistant basically saying, hey, I think we should put the company on this. And at the time, I even had told a family member, like, I think I was considering more of an influencer role, but I had already established this brand, and I was evaluating, did I want to be the brand or did I want the products to be what we were promoting?
See, that's something I just talked about like 2 weeks ago on the show, about a moment where at one point it was about like the center or like the school or like a Anusara, but then at a certain point it became more like the teacher was the brand.
Yep.
And you were making the choice. What did you decide?
I definitely chose the brand. I chose the product because I saw it as more scalable. I saw it as something that could allow it to be more than just me. As a business person, I saw
maybe not just yoga world, like it would have potential beyond that. I could see you wouldn't want to like pigeonhole it,
And that was the idea. I look back and realized that I was actually a pretty good candidate to put myself forward because my focus on the actual embodiment piece and the mindfulness piece have remained so steady and consistent and only deepened. And so that's why I've gone back to coaching, is because when it really comes down to it, my goal is to support individuals and empower them and educate them and inspire them. And yes, you actually can do that through a brand, but it's always just like a notch to the left or right. yes, women putting on clothes that make them feel gorgeous and like the goddesses that they are, and that like allow for free movement and give them confidence. Like those are all useful things, but I would rather be doing that from the inside out. And that's ultimately why I closed my company last year.
Wait, we'll get there. First, I'm curious to hear part of being, so did you just like, were you just like on the circuit of festivals? Like where was your main,
Yes.
was it all about the in-person booths, or when did you go online with it?
Oh man, I went online, I think at about the 2-year mark. So I was doing the festival circuit and then living in Bali for the winter. So the festival circuit was mostly spring, summer, early fall. And then
Yes, you needed the good weather for it, right?
You did. And it was a wonderful pulse because I'd go live with creatives and immerse myself in yoga and come out with a new collection. And then I'd go sell it through the circuit for the spring, summer, fall. It was grueling work. And it was over time, the bigger I got. So like the more successful I got, the further away from the reason I did it became, because I was too busy to participate in the very events I was at. But I would do everything from Yoga Journal and Wanderlust to like smaller Ashtanga events, to music festivals as well. So it was
like, how many a year were you doing, would you say? Do you know? If you had
10 to 30, but over time I even had an extra staff doing additional events.
Yeah.
So we would overlap sometimes, like we'd have more than one event happening at the same time.
So does that mean, I imagine, like you mentioned, like part of initially the gig was like you got to meet all these cool teachers, because the festivals did have lots of cool teachers at them. So when you started, was it a little bit more of like you still practicing it? Because I just think about yoga centers and the way that happened for a lot of us teachers too, where it started out as just like this extension of your practice, but at some point you're just like doing admin all the time.
That's exactly right. I mean, in the early years, what was the most magical for me is I would get invited to teacher trainings or intensives or immersions and be allowed to sell at the event, and then also sometimes given the event itself for free. So I was just able to be in the flow and in the experience, but somehow like right next to the teacher, and even kind of like became friends with them more than a student to them. And those relationships to this day remain some of my most precious. And I got to really see a different part of the yoga industry as it was evolving, because I was right next to the people being highlighted.
You got to see the backstage stuff, like when they're like hanging around having dinner or whatever, right?
Sure. Or, having their own experiences, because, we see teachers having to stand in the role of teacher, but they're human beings. So they have their own hardships occurring or challenging days. And that's not always appropriate for a student to be witness to, but I wasn't a student. I was in that role also, but very more frequently, I was showing up as not quite an assistant, more of a friend, the person they could talk to in their breaks. And
because you were from the clothing line, right?
I was an advanced practitioner that knew was in their mind there for this other reason, so I could support them in as many ways as made sense. It was a pretty remarkable role. Like, I have no regrets.
Well, you also had some really good models. Like if one of your first models was Richard, because Richard seemed to do a pretty good job of like navigating the pedestals that the teachers were getting put on. Let's say maybe better than some other teachers. And like, it seems to me, I never worked with Shibari. I don't know her at all, but it seems like she's handled that too, maybe better than other folks did, because when you got that big, people did kind of put you up on a pedestal. And so how much like transparency, or how much teachers, you got to see the teachers when they weren't in their big display of their teaching, I too had that experience of kind of getting to hang out with some of my teachers and get to know them as friends and kind of get to see the other side. I don't know that everybody did.
Yeah, and I think every one of those teachers had a different way of coping with it and a different strategy for dealing with it. And frankly, they each had different experiences, like your comparing Richard and Shiva, it's couldn't be
very
more
different. Yeah.
And I mean, Shiva's very practice was this expressive piece. So like, of course, in the end, that becomes a part of her teaching, but also her brand and how you manage those two parts, like staying in integrity with your own practice, translating that and transmuting that to your students so that they can go on and be teachers themselves while also selling it, right? Because I mean, you're having to continually sell it. It was kind of amazing. Richard, it felt more like a local teacher, even though he had global presence, and the Ashtanga practice is just so different.
Yeah, going to the workshop regularly because you live close by is real different than like traveling to go to a big Shiva event,
It couldn't have been any more different. So,
yeah. Right. All right. So you managed to hold it down at the Ohm Collection, the company you started for, you said like 10 years up until last year.
Yeah,
is that right?
It was a 15-year-old company, and I considered selling or I considered closing. And in the end, I decided to close. I couldn't quite let go of it. I'm still not 100% sure if it's over forever. And I may even, the current plan is to actually launch my coaching business into that container, because I have been concurrently running two different coaching programs in the fitness space. One is a 90-day hormone reset for women over 35, specifically targeting like muscle development and hormone balancing and like boosting their energy without like diets or too severe of a workout. But then I have another clientele who is really aiming for strength. And so I call that the Get Strong Now program, very direct. But I had the yogis in my heart as I built that, because I could always excel at these advanced poses because I was strong. And I actually felt like having more muscle that I then elongated through yoga and was of benefit. And it would often be that my yoga practice would suffer if I got too lean or I lost too much muscle mass. So the idea with that program is taking anyone where they're at and building strength and skeletal muscle in as effective and efficient way as possible. So whether that's a total beginner or somebody who's advanced in yoga but realizes that they're losing mass or want additional strength, like that program is focused on them. And so I haven't yet launched those programs into my large newsletter list, just because I was working out some kinks and observing this new brand as it was growing. But that's next on the list.
I see. All right. So before we get into hormone balancing and strength training, I guess the last bit for me about kind of like the trajectory of the yoga related businesses and even the kind of turn now, which I have also been making of like, oh, how do I get back into the room, like on a one-to-one level with people again, is the kind of, the big move online. So you already had yourself set up with infrastructure for e-commerce and stuff. Did you have a good year or two during the pandemic before it went south? Or like, how did it go for you over the last few years when everything went online?
Timing was a little tricky for me. So right before COVID, like the 3-4 months before, I was already pregnant and with my first and only child, and was deciding whether to move 100% towards coaching, because I'd already been doing that for a few years, and sell my company then. That was like the other moment I considered leaving my business, or scaling it. And my husband actually decided to try to support the process of us scaling the business. So it was the first time we were doing extensive online advertisement and like pouring money into the brand. And so it was really good timing when COVID first struck, because it's loungewear. I mean, it was yoga apparel, but also flowy, soft, beautiful clothes. And so we did extremely well, but then not too long thereafter, everyone had to pour online. So ads started getting really expensive. And then there was an election very shortly thereafter that. Additional expense being poured into advertising.
And I think that, sorry to interrupt you, but I think like I remember doing like Google AdWords and even like some Amazon stuff. At some point, they just would like tweak the algorithm and suddenly you weren't getting as many sales,
Well, we went through 3 different ad agencies in that short period of time, because there was just nobody really knew what was happening. It was just very volatile is the word that constantly comes up. And so it became very risky. And then I, have my daughter a handful of months after that. And it just, trying to manage a volatile, like exponentially growing business with no childcare because of COVID and it being your first child, it was a lot. I'll put it that way. And not even to mention just sort of the stress associated with being on lockdown and not leaving your house for.
Talk about a dysregulated nervous system. We all were dysregulated, man.
I think we still are.
Yeah, trying our best. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So your experience of having your first daughter is where all the hormone balancing comes into play, probably, right?
To some extent, yeah. So I breastfed her for 2.5 years, and it was actually when I weaned her that things went from like bad to worse. And that was a transition no one had ever really talked to me about. And so as someone who's doing their best to become an expert in this area, what I've seen is that anytime your system, your body, is having a large hormonal transition, so puberty, pregnancy, postpartum, and then like weaning, and then also perimenopause, menopause, it's like all of a sudden the soup that is your hormones have changed. And so then instead of there being like consistency to how your body responds to things, it all of a sudden responds totally differently. And so you have this invitation to make changes to your life. Like puberty is a really great time to get kids involved in sports because it can help like moderate their crazy. I don't know how else to put it. And in, pregnancy windows of time, like it's a really great time to start bringing in some breath work or some mindfulness techniques and learn some stress reduction elements because you can see volatility there. But for me, my biggest sort of drop was when I was 2.5 years postpartum. I weaned my daughter completely and I just felt like my hormones fell off a cliff. And I was already wrestling with some postpartum depression, but I just like went into a space where I had such intense brain fog that I tell people this moment, but I tried to turn like my toaster to Google and I tried to like put my purse away in the cupboard. And I was still in a place of awareness. So I like observed myself doing this. And at the time I was working as a lawyer again, which is just, it was a convenient job to take at the time. And I realized, I said, my capacity, something is off. And I saw like multiple doctors and even did hormone like blood work tests and everything came back normal. And I looked at this doctor who was supposed to be kind of a specialist. And I said, I've been a competitive athlete my entire life. I do everything, quote, right from the perspective of health. And I'm trying to explain to you that in less than a month, I went from a fully functioning human being to incomplete collapse. Something is wrong. You just can't figure it out. And that was the moment where after like multiple specialists, I was like, okay, once again, I'm going to have to go figure this information out myself. I'm going to have to test things on myself. I'm going to solve this problem. And it took all of about 3 months for me to get all of my hormones back into a space where I could start building from there. And some people, I've seen recently certain trainers and things saying that unless you're talking about hormone replacement, there's nothing you can do to balance your hormones. That is not accurate. I think what they're trying to say there is if you have a severe problem and you've changed your lifestyle and you still have hormone problems, you might need to have hormone replacement. And that I agree with, but it's just that there's not always a drug or a surgery associated with the changes that can be made that can really help somebody. So, that's where the muscle as medicine comes in. That is sort of where my heart and soul come into, is like I had been a competitive long distance athlete. So when I started trying to lose the baby fat or whatever, get in shape again, I immediately turned towards swimming and running. And instead of it making me feel better, I was feeling really like dragged down and exhausted at the end of these workouts. So much so that I just felt like giving up, which was now looking back really useful from a coach to a client perspective, because I know what it feels like to sit in that place of hopelessness. But I started finding sources that suggested that, weightlifting tends to be better for people who are in menopause. I didn't know if I was in menopause. It turns out I wasn't, but I was having all the symptoms of menopause, like night sweats, trouble sleeping, brain fog.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.